Welcome back, everybody. And our next speaker is Ron B. Wilson. And he has spent the past 15 years working with some of the best wedding photography studios in the US. And he has personally photographed over 500 weddings around the globe. But now he's reconnected with his true passion, photojournalism. It all began when he was selected for an internship at the Miami Herald, which molded him and his talents into who he is today. After shooting recent projects for Photographers Without Borders, he realized that photography literally has the power to change the world. And that's what he intends to do with his life and his career. Please welcome Ron B. Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just before 9 a.m. on the morning of September 11, 2001, I received a phone call from a fellow photographer in Florida, and she called explaining that there was a plane accident at the World Trade Center. So I immediately got up and grabbed my camera gear, film, and batteries and headed out the door. I jumped on the subway and headed south as far as I could, and by the time I made my way out of the concrete stairwell onto the asphalt landing, both buildings had been hit. Black smoke and fire billowed out, and I knew that immediately that this was no accident. So I take the responsibility of this story very seriously. To be part of it was kind of a destiny and a very consequential day in my life. The one word that describes that day in the 20 years since for me is resilience. It describes the emergency personnel, New York City itself and its residents, and it also describes a lot of my photography assignments over the years, from 9/11 to the struggles throughout India, from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant to some of the education needs in Central America. And these are some of the stories I'd like to share with you today. And in between my stories, I'll try to break it up with just tips and lessons that I've learned as a photographer over the years. But back on 9/11, my initial thought was naive. Oh, the firemen are here. They're going to run up and put out the fire. Fire trucks and sirens raced in every direction. It would be okay, I figured. But as I moved closer, walking past people running in the opposite direction or just simply paralyzed in fear, I realized the extent of my shock and denial. I remember noticing New York's diversity in this moment. People of every nationality were suddenly speaking the same language, and you just had to look at each other's faces to understand each other. As I was still weaving through the streets of Lower Manhattan, the South Tower fell, and it took just a few seconds to disappear completely. By the time I made it to the West Side Highway, I got a clear view of the carnage. Was there really only one tower there? It was unbelievable. I had seen these buildings as immovable since the 1980s. I remember the first time I saw the Twin Towers. It was 1986, and they were a North Star for us lost souls. They were always there, guiding us, so tall that they seemed to ascend forever, especially at night. In fact, in 1972, when they were first built, they were literally the tallest buildings on Earth. They were instantly recognizable, a landmark of technology when mixed with breathtaking ambition. And it was just truly unbelievable that this, was happening and that I happened to be there. The most important thing was that the emergency personnel really rose to their biggest challenge. That day, New York City's bravest was faced with the worst, and they gave us their best. And I hope that some of my images help show them at their best. At 10:28 a.m., the second ground-shaking roar began, and this time I was much closer. Like everyone and everything else, I was covered in that thick white powder, and it was impossible for us on the ground to avoid the toxic medley of fumes that were washing over us. But amazingly, these same first responders kept returning to ground zero day after day, week after week, month after month. They knew that they had to keep searching for survivors. And they were honestly the true heroes. Once the dust cleared a bit, I was able to look up and see for the first time clearly that the buildings had just simply disappeared, like a magic trick. They were gone. I remember hearing a police officer yell into his two-way radio, "It's gone. The World Trade Center is gone." Paramedics and firefighters raced in every direction with empty stretchers and equipment that they couldn't use because there really was no one left to save. Everything was gone. I remember how much I loved being downtown and looking up at those towers, and for the first time, clearly, I could see that they had simply vanished. As I headed home and ran out of film that day, I was able to reflect on the value and inspiration that I witnessed. Firefighters ran into rubble, police officers saved lives, strangers hugged on the streets, store owners gave away bottles of water to people in need, and that's the true story of September 11th, a story of resilience. I believe in life and in every situation, you should try to take away as many lessons as you can and try to leave a little piece of yourself behind. We grow while helping others grow, and we survive by sharing these memories and stories and history. It's something essential to humanity's existence. So like I said, in between some of my photography stories, I'd like to break things up and just offer short bits of wisdom of lessons that I've learned as a photographer. If you're a beginner, hopefully you'll learn something. If you're already familiar with the basics or you're a photographer, hopefully you'll appreciate something insightful. And if you're not a photographer at all, I hope that you can appreciate the life lessons that come from photography. I see the camera as a great metaphor for the human condition. We're constantly evolving, we're complex machines, we need maintenance and care, and our observations can literally change the world. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was creativity. And creativity is one of the most important things in the world, and that's not just true for photography, that's true for any career. Thinking creatively and creative thinking can help you in any industry, and like most things, it can be learned. So number one, try new things, strive for originality, try to find your voice and see the world through your unique eyes. Number two, have a personal project going at all times. Projects like my Men in Hat series, which is basically photos of different men in headgear of the places that I visit around the world, isn't something that I'm shooting for money, but it's something that I'm passionate about. I've been shooting it as long as I've been traveling and something I'll continue to do over the years. Number three, let others inspire you. When I'm in a rut, and we've all been there, I search my favorite photographers on Instagram. And when I find an image that resonates with me, I study it. What kind of composition did they use? What is the lighting in the photograph? And what kind of emotion does the image create? And especially here at Exposure, some of the best photographers in the world are in this room and right outside the hallways. There's so many images. And I challenge everyone to maybe just pick 10 images that really speak to you and study them. And the great thing about it is you might be on an assignment years later and you can find that inspiration in your photo. It might be a completely different subject, but you're able to pull that inspiration because you've stored it in your subconscious mind. And number four, try to find personal stories and connections between the places that you visit and the people that you photograph. When I happened to be in Morocco on the anniversary of September 11th, the host family that I was staying with in Casablanca were so interested in the fact that I was from New York and that I had been there on September 11th. And we were able to bond, and we spent the entire day talking about that and the connections that we had and how our cultures were really intertwined for such a long time. So try to find those stories and how they connect. So years later, after 2001, I had the great fortune of traveling to Guatemala in Central America. It was my first foreign assignment in a long time. And it really rejuvenated my creativity and my passion and my work. You can assume a lot about a person in a photograph. And when you see this photo of Miguel in a wheelchair, you might think that he looks a little bit grumpy, confined to a life in a wheelchair. But I didn't see that. I didn't see an unhappy kid in a wheelchair. I saw a bonding community. Because there's more to the photo than just Miguel. There's his friend and the matching green uniform, and he's smiling really big and pulling his friend's wheelchair back. And this would be an emblem of how I would see the assignment and the country as a whole. Comfort among one another and children running fearlessly and freely in their community. I had spent the years between 2001 and 2015 shooting mostly portraits and weddings, and I always gravitated towards the human emotion. Not much of a landscape photographer. I like to photograph people. So I searched for projects that would allow me to travel to less fortunate places in the world and document resilient people working in difficult circumstances. So I found Photographers Without Borders, which was a great connection for me. They send photographers around the world and bring attention to projects that wouldn't necessarily have the attention, and they're grassroots organizations that need attention. My assignment was to photograph a organization called Long Way Home. And they are building a school out of recyclable items such as plastic, glass bottles, and tires. And this entire community was really a combination of comfort among one another and freedom and health. And the one thing that I really got out of this assignment was the importance of education, and especially for marginalized people in rural communities. I mean, education is optimism, right? If our kids are smarter than we are, they're going to be able to solve the problems that we couldn't fix. And it's a key that opens up the door to cultures and religions and education. Not everyone has the same advantages as we do, and it's something now that I've really become passionate about and something that I plan on concentrating. And I've actually started my own foundation concentrating specifically on marginalized people in these rural communities. Another photo that I really loved from this assignment was of this young girl running past a colorful map of the Americas. And I realized, at first I liked it because both feet happened to be flinging in the air at the time that I shot it. But later I realized the context of how close the US and Guatemala are, and how we should consider these people family, our neighbors. And when we uplift communities like these, like we would our family or our neighbors, the whole world benefits. And it's really something to keep in mind. So a friend recently asked me what I wanted to do with this foundation and the whole idea of education, and I just said to help people help other people. And what I mean by that is if I was only able to help people that I can meet one-on-one or face-to-face in my hometown, I might only help a few dozen people in my entire life. But by directing my attention to these organizations that are already helping hundreds or thousands of people, I'm able to leverage my time and talents, and the possibilities are endless. So the second topic I wanted to talk about was composition and how important composition is. I started shooting when film was the only choice, and we only had a certain amount of rolls that we could use for every assignment. And so you had to really slow down and conserve the images. Nowadays, with digital, I feel like we've gotten kind of lazy, and it's easy to just shoot repetitively and then worry about it later. Personally, I don't like sitting behind my desk working in Photoshop. I prefer to be out shooting or spending time with my family. A couple composition elements that I really like is the rule of thirds, and that's something that's not just for photography, but art in general, and that's basically putting your main subject into an imaginary third. And then I also like shooting through things like foliage and having things in the foreground. I believe that that creates a interesting, dynamic composition. So I remember 1986 very vividly. There were so many world events that happened that year. In the US, we had this space shuttle Challenger disaster, and in the UK, it was the mad cow disease. So there were so many things happening. But one event really stuck with me over the years, and that was the Reactor 4 accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And I was just involved in the world around me and news and journalism, and I kind of kept all those news reels and still photos categorized in the back of my mind for some kind of future use. Well, in 2018, I received an email asking if I was interested in traveling to Ukraine to cover the story of an organization working in Chernobyl. So within 1 second, I just hit the reply all button with one word, and that was yes. And luckily for me, I was collaborating with a filmmaker, and it's a guy named Jeffrey Garriok, and he's a filmmaker from Canada. And it was such a great collaboration, and that's something I could definitely recommend that you do. If you're a photographer and you know a great filmmaker, try to collaborate on some projects because it really elevates the story. And the great thing about it was Jeff asked such interesting, thoughtful questions. I was able to understand the subjects that I was photographing. Normally, in still photography, I take notes and I'm a pretty good interviewer, but by collaborating with someone who's a professional at it really helps elevate your stories. Another person that was invaluable to my experience in Ukraine was Lucas Hickson, and he is the founder of this organization called Clean Futures Fund. He's a nuclear scientist from the US, and he went to Ukraine to study the effects of Chernobyl and ended up staying on and starting this foundation. And they concentrate on education for the generations of Chernobyl, and they also concentrate on the liquidators, who were the first responders, just like on 9/11, the heroes of the time. And one of the most interesting liquidators that I met was a lady named Adele. And she really helped tie the whole story together. We had met her at a community center, and she invited us over to her house one day, and she said to come over for coffee. And we ended up staying the entire day. And we learned so much about her. And it was getting that access to her, and she wanted us to know that her life meant something and that it wasn't just the pitfalls of being involved with the Chernobyl accident. She worked at the plant before, during, and after the accident. And for me, she was the entire project. She tied it together. She was Chernobyl, and she was resilient. Luckily, Jeff made a behind-the-scenes video clip that I'd like to show you guys. A lot of this didn't make our eventual film, which is called The Children of Chernobyl, but he was nice enough to put together some of the afternoon that we spent with Adele, and I'm going to play that now. I hope you enjoy it. My name is Ron B. Wilson. We are in Slavudic, Ukraine. Tried to do a little bit of, investigating and a little bit of research to some of the history of Ukraine. And, everything sort of goes back to the Chernobyl accident, really, like in recent history. I wasn't really sure what to expect, and I was pleasantly surprised at the resilience of the people, the friendliness of the people. We never met anyone that was unwelcoming. I mean, everyone that we met here just exceeded every expectation.
Oh, look,
Wow.
my
You
hair. Okay.
This one I love of her and her son, so maybe we can try that one. So let's just try we'll get the one photo of her sitting and looking out the window, and then I'll get one photo of her holding them. I think it's important to be able to make people feel comfortable before you pull out your cameras, and it's important that people feel that you're representing them well and that you're doing it with the sense of wanting to tell their story, not creating a story. You know, you want them to be authentic. Well, today, in general, it was an amazing day. We spent the afternoon meeting with one of the liquidators. Typically, we kind of go in and just get to work, and she really wanted to sit down with us and get to, have a conversation and get to know us first, which really was amazing.
Это я in Odessa.
Well, it must have been winter. Are you singing?
Вот это Калинка, Калинка, Калинка моя. Это я пела.
She kind of snuck away and came back with a box of photographs of like her whole life story and her and her friends going to Odessa as children, and her and her children, and one of her sons had passed away, and that was an important part really of her story, was that she had lost a son, and she kept making the point that you shouldn't have to bury your own children. And that actually personally affected me because when I was 1 year old, I had an older brother that died. And so I was raised with a mother who had lost a son. And so she was a little overprotective of me, and that always was a big part of my life. So I really felt connected with her and her story. And she actually reminded me a lot of my mom. So it was very special. The power of photography, I mean, is really just being able to capture a moment and try to tell a person's story without words. I mean, if you can see a photograph that makes you have an emotion or a feeling, that's what we all strive for. And sometimes it might be just one shot out of 1,000 that really captures the moment. So, as I was mentioning earlier, just about trying to find connections within some of the stories that we tell, this year we all had a little extra time on our hands, and I found the connection between COVID-19 and Chernobyl. At first, the government kept a lethal outbreak secret from its own citizens and the world. People started wearing masks, and we're all still wearing masks, afraid of air itself. First responders became our heroes. Nowadays, the doctors and nurses are our heroes, and back then it was the liquidators, much like on 9/11 with the firefighters and the police officers. And I just thought it was an interesting connection of trying to tie together some of the stories. I believe that in life there's not a lot of coincidences, and that things definitely happen for a reason. So the next photography thing I wanted to talk about was photojournalism. And I started my career, I studied photojournalism in college, and I interned and freelanced for newspapers in Florida. And I landed a really excellent internship in Eastern Europe, and I traveled around. And one of the first assignments that I had was in Sarajevo in Bosnia, right after the end of the war. And it was so affecting for me, coming from a small town in Florida and not having really seen much of the world. And the Olympic Stadium that had just welcomed the world only a decade earlier became a makeshift graveyard, and people were burying their loved ones in the Olympic Stadium. And that's something that really stuck with me over the years. Another thing about that project was that the resilient kids that would play in the schoolyards, there were still snipers that were held out in the hills above the city. And these children only could come out of the classrooms for really short periods of time. But they were still kids growing up, and it was just such a different experience than what I had been used to, and something that really stuck with me over the years. So the key to photojournalism is access, and it's the difference between taking an interesting photo and actually getting access, like I did with Adele that day. If I didn't spend the entire afternoon with her, I probably would have just photographed her at the community center and got some really interesting information, but it elevated the story. And the really great thing and the inspirational thing now is that we're all photographers, right? I mean, we're armed with our smartphones and our mirrorless cameras, and storytelling has become part of everyone's life. And I honestly believe that photography has the power to change the world. And if we're all storytellers and we're all photographers, then we kind of have a responsibility to try to do positive things and to change the world. So in my career, I've had the opportunity to travel to India several times, and for me, it's my favorite place in the world. I love the people, I love the energy, I love everything about it. In 2007, I had a chance meeting of a lady on an airplane, and she told me that she was building a school in southern India for a disadvantaged community. And she showed me a few photos on her phone, and I committed right then. I changed my whole schedule around. And within a few weeks, I was landing in Haliao, which is in the southern state of Karnataka. And this community can trace their roots back to Africa. They are descendants of slaves that were brought over between the 15th and the 18th century by the Portuguese merchants. And they didn't even have a school in this area. And they are literally on the lowest tier of the society there. And the interesting thing is that girls at disproportionately higher rates than boys will drop out of school. And when that happens, it causes underage marriage, homelessness, and child labor. And it was such an important thing to have this opportunity to be able to be involved with this project. They had just started the construction of the school when I was there, and they were just breaking ground. And the whole community, men, women, and children, they all proudly brought pails of sand and rocks to the construction site to help the foundation of the school. And the one thing that stuck with me was that the children didn't even have shoes to wear. They just didn't wear shoes. But as I saw their bare feet sink into this mud, I felt like the school and the foundation of the school would be forever strong. And I always wonder what happened to the kids that I met there. They're probably teenagers. Well, they are teenagers by now, and they'll probably be adults by the time I ever get back. But I wonder how the trajectory of their life had changed and what the future held for them. So many years later, I had another opportunity to travel to the complete opposite side of this enormous country, to the northern state of Bihar. And Bihar sits in the foothills of the Himalayas and gets consistent flooding more than any other place in India. And every year, rivers overflow the banks and villages get washed away. And most recently in 2017, they had the worst year in a long time, and hundreds of people lost their lives. The organization that I was there covering was an organization called Azad India Foundation, and they started in 1998 with one mission in a village to help women with empowering women in this community. And it was honestly just such an amazing experience for me. They've now extended to over 50 villages, and they have extended to healthcare, education, and job training skills for the community. I'm having a little problem with, yeah. So they've extended to over 50 different projects, and now they are a very big voice for education and healthcare throughout the entire country of India. So honestly, this was such an honor for me and such a big experience for me to be able to experience this community. There was a story around every corner that people wanted to tell their story, and they wanted me to be there as much as I wanted to be there. One of the most memorable people that I met was a lady named Belkis Belgium, and she had received a sewing machine from the foundation, and she started her own business, and now she supports her whole family. And I just love this photo of her big smile and that yellow sari and that lime green wall. but I especially love her family watching on with pride as she was demonstrating her skills for me that afternoon. So I think it's so easy nowadays with Instagram and social media to believe that there's no places unseen in the world and that everything's been photographed. But I'd like to tell you that there are these small communities and these places of innocence, these little wonders that tourists don't go to and governments leave behind. And they're really interested in sharing their stories with the world. A lot of the people that I met there told me I was the first foreigner that they had ever met, which was a lot of pressure to be the ambassador for foreigners everywhere, but I hope that I represented us well. So the last photo tip I wanted to talk about was lighting and just the importance of lighting. I mean, that's the great secret to photography, right? If you're just starting out, I recommend that you practice on one subject and photograph it at different times. Photograph it at sunset, at sunrise. Photograph it on a cloudy day, on a sunny day. And then compare those images and see which ones that you like and what is able to represent the feeling and the emotion that you want to show. And once you understand light on a gut level and you're not so interested or you're not so consumed by your mechanics and what settings you have, you're able to tell more powerful stories, and it just becomes second nature. So why do I do all this? The interesting thing about a lot of my work, and especially everything that I've shown you today, I didn't choose these projects, they chose me. They kind of fell into my life and came to me, whether it was the streets of New York City on a day like 9/11, or being able to travel to a place like the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. These things came to me and they kind of fell into my life. Like I said, I don't believe anything in life is a coincidence and that everything happens for a reason. So this year, I mean, we all had a lot of extra time in our life, right? I was homebound and quarantined like everyone else, and it gave me time to really reflect, and we had extra time to prepare for this exposition and this seminar. So I actually wrote a book by the same name, and it's called Resilience. And I just took a lot of my stories that I had already had short blog posts and just developed them a little bit more, and was able to really think about the importance of listening to other people and people who don't live the same life experience that we do. It's just such an important thing because, I mean, as you know, in our country, we had a lot of things happen, a political contest that just dragged on forever, and a lot of racial issues that came up that needed to be discussed. And in a way, this was the worst year ever, and in a way, this was like the best possibility that we could have, to have this time to think about things and to reflect and kind of do a complete reset. I mean, it was such an important time, and hopefully it's never going to happen in our lifetimes again, but it was just a really special time for me to be able to reflect on all of these things, and especially education for these marginalized people and rural communities. So I believe that reflecting on the resilience of the world around me and all of the places that I've seen and the people that I've been able to photograph, that it's important to think about our past to know where we're going in the future. Because we really have to analyze that and think about our past and try to not let history repeat itself and learn from our mistakes. And once we actually study that and we really try to make that change, I honestly believe that that we can learn from it, and that there's so much more out in the world that we can make change and be able to affect other people's lives. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to be here today and to be able to speak to you and share some of these stories. Like I said, we're going to do a book signing later on today, and I would love to be able to meet everybody, and can't wait to get back out into the festival and get to see all the exhibits. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing all of those wonderful pictures, and congratulations on the foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a break now. We'll be back here at 4:40, and we'll be seeing the work from Claire Thomas. So please do join us at 4:40. Thank you very much.